A new Treasury report is unveiling the burden of childcare costs on American families. The report found that the average family with at least one child under 5 would need to spend approximately 13% of its income on childcare. Many families say that those costs are simply unaffordable. Vice President Kamala Harris and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen pushed for investments in affordable childcare this week. They say that expanding these funds are critical to ensuring U.S. growth and global competitiveness. For more, I want to bring in Sarah Ewall-Wice. Sarah is a CBS News reporter covering economic policy. Hey there, Sarah. Share with us what families who are struggling to balance these costs told you.
Yes, I have spoken to a number of families, and they are all facing some very tough decisions when it comes to their financial situations because of childcare. Keep in mind, childcare in this country is reaching upwards of $10,000, and that's basically putting it around the same cost as in-state college tuition. And so one of the women I spoke to this week, she talked about how she's been having challenges affording childcare for the past 20 years. When her oldest was a baby, it was a challenge. She had to rely on family. And then she ended up being remarried and having other children. So now she's 5 kids. But after number 2, they really had to reevaluate. And by the time she had child number 3, basically her income and her husband's incomes were basically, one of them was breaking even with the cost of childcare. And they had to make the decision for one of them to leave the workforce. And it ended up being her. And so she's dealing with this as a full-time job, stay-at-home mom. But the reality is if she could afford childcare, she would put her children in childcare because they're living, 6 family members are living on a $50,000 income, and they could use the extra money, but they just simply can't afford it. Another woman I spoke with this week, she has a 1-year-old at home. Basically, she's working part-time, and the 1-year-old is in daycare part-time, and those costs are basically breaking even as well. And so now she's facing the tough decision, well, do I return to a different job full-time to cover childcare full-time, or does she become a full-time stay-at-home mom, which is something she hadn't really thought she'd have to make the decision on at this point in her life as a parent. And I've spoken to many other mothers. One mother I spoke to in the past told me she was working overnights because that's when she knew someone would be home with her child, because during the day she needed to be home with her child because she couldn't afford childcare. So this really is a pressing situation, and it's making parents have to make the decision whether to stay or leave the workforce. And in some cases, they simply don't have the options.
Well, the Treasury report said that it's not just parents who are feeling this financial burden, Sarah. Providers are feeling it too. Tell us what they're experiencing.
Yes, so, I mean, it's hard for parents, but these childcare facilities are also operating with very tight margins. When it comes to childcare workers, they're basically making an average of $27,000 a year. These are the people in charge of watching our children, and many of them are having to rely on programs themselves to help make ends meet, government programs, because they're making low wages. At the same time, we have challenges with the number of facilities out there. About more than half of Americans live in places with so-called childcare deserts. I mean, when there's a challenge keeping a childcare facility open because of the money not coming in, and then you have the fact that people are unable to access them because there aren't any in the areas where they're needed, it becomes a real problem all around, both for the providers as well as for parents. So it really is a challenge on both ends of the spectrum, and it's becoming a greater challenge as time goes on.
Well, as we mentioned, Vice President Harris and Secretary Yellen are really pushing for more spending in child care. Remind us, what are the administration's plans for investing in child care as part of its $3.5 trillion spending plan?
Yeah, so this is one component of that much larger plan that you mentioned. And so basically what they're looking to do is they're looking to make childcare more affordable on a sliding scale. You mentioned before bringing me in that they're looking at families are spending about 13% of income. What's considered affordable is about 7%. So about half of that, basically. And so the idea is to make it more affordable on a scale for lower and middle income Americans so that they can afford it. This would be done through subsidies and tax credits, as well as making it so that the child care workers are earning a living wage as well. The other component of this is making universal pre-K available. Early childhood education has long-term impacts on kids, so making universal pre-K available to 3- and 4-year-olds. But this is not without controversy, even though it's well known that this is a challenge for many families. This is a question now of really, how does one pay for this? You mentioned $3.5 trillion, the whole plan. The child care component of that is about $450 billion. So this is really something that there are members within the Democratic caucus even who are questioning the scope of this reconciliation package, rather, and also really how does one pay for this in a way that works for both the programs but also for the country as a whole. And so there's a lot of hurdles moving forward on this front. It's going to be something to watch moving forward.
Well, we certainly know the research on universal pre-K is pretty compelling. Sarah, one more question for you. Just in comparison, how does the U.S. stack up against other countries when it comes to child care and education?
Now, the reality is not well at this point in time. Basically, the United States, when it comes to spending on childcare, is ranked 35th out of 37 countries in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So 35th out of 37. Basically, when you look at this, France is spending about $7,400 on childcare for children up to the age of 5. You look at the European Union, they're spending about $5,000 on childcare per child. The United States is coming in less than $3,000. So we have a long way to go. And one of the things that this is something that experts have looked at is they've noticed that labor force participation, specifically among women, has remained stagnant over time, whereas in other countries, women's workforce participation has increased. And so they say there's a number of factors involved in that, but this Treasury report that came out did suggest that one of those factors is likely childcare, and that is something to consider moving forward when it comes to making sure people have access and are able to go to work. That can also spur economic growth as well.
All right, Sarah, thank you.